To begin the sermon, I'd like to begin with a story today. It's a true story of the Granite Mountain hotshots. Some of you may have seen a movie about this or read the book or the article. This happened in a town called Yarnell. Yarnell is about a town of about 700 residents. It's located about 80 miles northwest of Phoenix, Arizona. That's about 130 kilometers or so for the Canadians that are tuned in and people in Europe. 12 years ago, on June 23rd, 2013, lightning struck the ground, igniting the dense vegetation near the town. The slopes and the canyons in and around Yarnell had not burned since 1966, so they were thick, and the chaparral was 10 feet high in places and impassably dense. Initially, the fire was very small, but strong winds caused that fire to grow very rapidly. And on this Friday afternoon, several crews of firefighters were dispatched to the area, and they were trying to protect the homes and the businesses and people that lived in the area and contain this forest fire. One of the crews that was sent to help fight the blaze were the Granite Mountain Hotshots, an elite crew of firefighters that came out of Prescott, Arizona. This crew, along with the other crews, fought to contain the fire by creating a series of what they called fire lines. Fire line is a cleared strip of land. They try to clear it to the dirt, to the bare soil, and it's designed to stop the spread of the wildfire. They have to clear it right to the dirt, wide enough. If the winds are stronger, wider yet, but it's called a fire line, and fire lines, again, are created by removing all the vegetation. They do this either by hand with chainsaws and pickaxes and shovels and picks. Sometimes, if they have time, they'll get a bulldozer in there to help create a fire line. And fire lines help to contain that fire. So it gets up, burns up to the dirt, and there's no fuel for it. And unless the winds are strong enough to jump over the fire line, that can contain the spread of the fire wherever those fire lines are created. And lots of times they'll use roads and rivers and streams, maybe even previously burned areas, as fire stops because there's nothing left to burn in those areas. So as the teams of firefighters began to battle that fire, something went tragically wrong for the hotshots. Even though their spotter, who is on a mountain top a fair distance away, was informing them of the weather conditions and the change in wind, they believed they had time to retreat to safety. The afternoon thunderstorm activity caused the winds to shift and pushed the fire much faster in a different direction than they had expected. The unanticipated shift in the winds cut off the Granite Mountain Hotshots' escape route to their safety zone at the nearby Boulder Spring Ranch. Safety was 600 yards away when the fire trapped them. And on either side were steep, boulder-strewn slopes that were too steep to quickly climb up and out of. Behind them, the fire raced to catch them, partly because the planes that were dropping water and trying to extinguish the fire had dropped the water on their backburn and put the fire out that they had intentionally set to combat the big fire that was headed their way. When they looked ahead, the fire streamed into the mouth of the canyon, blocking their way to the ranch. And now their chance of escape had slipped by. It was too late, and the team only had one option. The crew maybe had 2 minutes to clear a space to the bare dirt, grab their fuel cans and chainsaws, and throw them as far into the brush as they could, and lay in their fire shelters face down on the ground. Fire shelter, if you haven't seen one, is made up of multiple layers of material. They have an outer layer of aluminum that is bonded to a thick silica, and it's kind of woven together. It looks much like a big aluminum sleeping bag. The fire shelter is designed to protect the firefighters from radiant heat, from some flames, and to trap breathable air and prevent toxic inhalation if they're in a situation that that's the case. However, when the temperature reaches 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, about 650 degrees Celsius, the aluminum shelter melts. Fire shelters were not designed for prolonged exposure to intense heat or contact with direct flames. And they're not a fail-safe solution. They're kind of a last-ditch effort to try to save people in a situation like this. On this particular day, with the winds blowing strong, the flames of fire were 70 feet long in cases. Air was moving so fast that the fire was being blown horizontally, and the temperature of the fire rose to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's over 1,000 degrees, almost 1,100 degrees Celsius. And the fire shelters could not save these men. All 19 firefighters died from the intense heat and from smoke inhalation and burns that resulted from this fast-moving wildfire that had engulfed them. Only the spotter on a mountaintop a considerable distance away escaped when he fled to a nearby road and was picked up by a vehicle driven by another team of firefighters. Well, what went wrong here? They had radios, they were in contact with the spotter and others. It was the unpredictable and rapidly changing fire behavior in these rugged mountains caused by this thunderstorm that prevented their escape. They hadn't dropped their packs and sprinted for safety. They thought they had time to reach Boulder Spring Ranch. They had underestimated how rapidly the conditions had shifted, and they were caught off guard, and it cost them their lives. What does this have to do with us in God's church? Well, spiritually speaking, in the near future, the world will be caught off guard. They don't see what's coming. The time of trouble that lies shortly ahead of us and the return of Jesus Christ will catch the world as a thief in the night. And that's the title of the sermon today, As a Thief in the Night. What about us? Will we be caught unaware, or will we be ready? Will we see the signs, anticipate what's coming, and be able to flee to a place of safety, or not? Go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. You've been hearing a lot of sermons from ministers in Church of God Assembly about, get your house in order, get the sin out of your life, clean up your act, time is short. We've heard a lot of messages on this topic. We were hearing messages about this 40 years ago in the Church of God. Get ready, time's short. And here we are, 39 years, almost 40 years from the death of Mr. Armstrong. But it is imminent, and a lot of people are asleep, and they're not really paying attention to what's happening in the world around them. Notice what Paul was inspired to write here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. He says, "But concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you." Those who are watching, those who are praying, those who are developing character and drawing close to God, they're always ready. They're not going to be caught unawares or unprepared. They're ready. They don't know exactly when Christ is going to return because he didn't want us to know. Wouldn't be good for us to know. He didn't give us a deadline or a date. That wouldn't be good for our character. And God the Father has put the time of Christ's return under his own authority and control. God the Father will be the one that gives Christ the command to return when it's time. It says, "For you yourselves know perfectly well that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night." You have been perfectly taught these things, Paul said. You've heard it from many times from Paul and others. We can say the same would apply to us now at the end of an age. We know perfectly well that it will come as a thief in the night. The expression here that is used regarding Christ's return and the coming time of judgment is an expression that literally means it will come upon the world when they don't expect it. They're not going to be ready for it. As a thief in the night. is the thing that he compares it to. If you think of a thief, they come suddenly, they come unexpectedly. They break into your house when you're not ready for it. A thief usually doesn't give you warning, hey, I'm going to come and rob you, right? They sneak in. They sometimes case your house or business or whatever. We don't see any indication. If we knew there was a robber coming, we'd stop it, and we'll get to that verse here in a bit. The point is, if possible, the man whose house he's about to break into has absolutely no way to know that he's about to break in. He's a thief in the night. It's unexpected. It's not something you can plan for. Verse 3, it says, "For when they say peace and safety, sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape." This is a really important verse for us to understand. You know, God says that when the political leaders on this planet say peace and safety, when they say everything is fine, he says, beware, because the direct opposite of what the leaders say is about to happen. You know, if you look at the world today, you look at our country today, you look what's happening with our president today, we're going to see peace, or at least what appears to be peace in the Middle East and in Europe. And we're seeing that big things happening, you know, every day, it seems. We could easily get to the point where the economy begins to pick back up. Things look really good. There's talk now about a golden dome, right? There's an iron dome over Israel, and now we've got something going to be even better. Canada goes, yeah, we want to be in on that too. You know, could we say peace and safety? Would the world leaders, would our president and others around the world say, look, finally, could sacrifices begin in a situation like this? Absolutely, I think they will. The world's going to be absorbed in the cares of this life. They're going to be lulled into a false sense of safety and security. Peace, the word peace gives the idea that there's no alarm, right? No feeling of alarm, no urgency. It's peace. Safety conveys the idea of security from external threats, right? We're safe. We don't have to worry about it. And the world turns a deaf ear to all the warnings that have been given and that the Bible gives about the coming judgment. The world will see no danger. They will be unprepared. And it was that way at the time of the flood. It was that way at the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then Paul here goes on to use the analogy of a woman who has labor pains. And the image is to stress the suddenness of the day of the Lord, right? You're a pregnant woman, you're near your due date, and then boom, labor pains hit, right? You can't really plan for that. It's unexpected. You know it's going to come. You know that time's inevitable, but when the labor pains come upon you, they come like a thief in the night, suddenly, unexpected. You're not ready for that first few labor pains. But he goes on in verse 4 to say, "You, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief." You know, you're not as you formerly were, right? Before you were called, your mind was open and you understood what you understand. You used to be in a state of spiritual darkness, but you're not anymore. Like, you know what the scriptures say. You know what's coming. You've heard many sermons and Bible studies about the end of the age and what to expect. The time of the end is imminent. The day of the Lord, again, will not overtake God's people as a thief in the night, because they're going to be looking for it. They're going to be preparing for it. And that's why God warns Laodiceans, which is the era that we live in at the end of an age, you know, repent or else, right? Wake up. You know, you're blind. Anoint your eyes with eye salve so you can see your real, true spiritual state. We have to be ready for the return of Christ. And nobody in the Church of God will be able to say they weren't warned. They weren't told, at least here. It's coming. You've been warned. You've been told. And if you don't do anything about it, it's going to fall on your own shoulders. He goes on here to say in verse 5, "You were all sons of light and sons of the day. We are not of the night or nor of darkness." So we are not in spiritual darkness. You know, as contrasted to the world, we've had our minds open to the truth. We should be spiritually awake. God said that we are to be praying for the kingdom to come. That should be a regular part of our prayers. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And you don't have to quote the exact words, but we look forward to the time when Christ is the king and his will is being done and he enforces his laws. And he will enforce them. It'll be wonderful. People don't keep the feast. They're going to stay home. He goes, okay, no rain. There's a consequence. There's a penalty because he loves people and he wants them to do the right thing so they can be blessed. If we love our children, we correct them, God says, because we want them to be in the kingdom. We want them on the right path. It's part of our responsibility or duty. But we have to be awake. We have to be alert spiritually. We have to be close to God. He says in verse 6, therefore let us not sleep as others do, but let us watch and be sober, or some translations, self-controlled. God has informed us about prophetic events. We know so much about prophecy. Do we know it all? No. And I believe that there are many things God will do at the end of the age that were just absolutely opposite of what we thought. He'll do it in a different way, in a different manner than we can imagine, because I think God enjoys performing miracles like providing manna for the Israelites. And then they complained. He said, okay, I'll give you quail. And he gave them so many quail, they finally had enough and said, no more quail, please. But God did some pretty amazing things. He parted the Red Sea. Wow, who would have thought of that? He protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in a burning fiery furnace, which was heated probably to 2,000 degrees or more. And you could see them walking around in the fire and no effect of fire on them. I mean, God did some amazing miracles. The lions did nothing to Daniel when he was cast into the den. God can't perform miracles if we're not people of faith and if we're not close to God. He's just not going to do it. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. He's going to test our faith, and he's going to see if we can say it, but do we really believe it? Are we willing to put our lives on the line, or our job on the line, or whatever on the line to do the right thing? We see that, it says be sober. It literally means to be temperate, especially with respect to wine. The allusion here is to the fact that people not only sleep at night, but they're frequently drunk at night. And spiritually speaking, the point is we have to have our spiritual lives in a state which would be appropriate for the return of Jesus Christ. We're ready for it. The bride has to be ready, which means they have to be on track spiritually. Let's go to Matthew 24. Matthew 24. We'll start in verse 21. Actually, verse 3, it kind of sets the stage. Matthew 24:3. It says, now as he, that's Christ, sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And he goes on to explain several things. Let's drop down now to verse 21. It says, then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh should be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. What is meant by the word saved in this verse? There are some commentaries and some people in the world that say the word saved here is used in a spiritual sense. It's talking about spiritual salvation. That is not what the church has taught, and certainly not what the verse means. This simply is about the preservation of physical human life. This verse clearly, if you look at the context, because the Greek can be taken either way, so you have to look at the context, and the context is very physical. The entire 24th chapter of Matthew deals with the basic problem of staying alive during wars. Verse 6, during famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. In verse 7, religious persecution. In verse 9, etc., etc., etc. Many of the modern translations of this verse, verse 22, refer to the fact that human life could literally be on the verge of total annihilation. The New English Bible, for instance, it says, if that time of trouble were not cut short, not a soul would be saved alive. The Moffat says, not a mortal would survive. The Berkeley's version says, no living thing would escape. The Phillips translation, no human being would survive. So clearly this is about speaking here about the preservation of physical human life. And Christ said, unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. Now, when he spoke to the audience that he spoke to nearly 2,000 years ago, it would not make a lot of sense to them. In fact, when Mr. Armstrong began teaching and preaching in 1934, it didn't make a lot of sense to people. Like, how is this possible? But 11 years later, in 1945, it began to make sense. Today, it makes full sense. Everybody knows. Today, this is being repeated around the world by scientists and heads of government. The words really couldn't be understood in the context here until 1945, when the first atomic bombs were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. By the early 1970s, the world nuclear stockpile was equivalent to 50,000 megatons of TNT. By the mid-1970s, not long later, it was 500 megatons in the nuclear stockpile. So that amounted to 150 tons of TNT for every person that lived on the planet. So we used to talk about overkill. The nuclear stockpile continued to rise all the way to 1986. And then because of world leaders around the world talking about, look, we got to cut the nuclear stockpile, we got to reduce our inventory. The inventory significantly declined. I don't think we'll ever know if the Soviet Union really got rid of their stuff or, other nations. They certainly appeared to be getting rid of things. However, if we look at the inventory that we have today, even though it is, less amount of weapons, the kind of weapons we have today are far more destructive than the weapons that they were reducing from the nuclear stockpile. So if we look at the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II, the one was called Little Boy, the other was called the Fat Man. They killed about 150 and 250,000 people respectively with those bombs. Modern nuclear bombs produce enormous amounts of energy, and their significance can be appreciated by the words that were coined kiloton and megaton. A kiloton is 1,000 tons, and a megaton is 1,000,000 tons. And these terms are used to describe the blast energy of these weapons in weights of conventional chemical explosive called TNT. So Little Boy released about 15 kilotons of energy. That's 15,000 tons of TNT. It sent a mushroom cloud about 25,000 feet into the air. Contrast that with the largest nuclear weapon ever detonated. It was a test. It was called the Tsar Bomba. The Russians detonated it in a test, the Soviet Union at the time. They did that in 1961. That bomb produced 50 megatons blast. It was 3,333 times more powerful than Little Boy. They said that the bomb produced a mushroom cloud that went 130,000 feet in altitude. That's 4.5 times the height of the tallest mountain, Mount Everest. 4.5 times that height. The shock wave went around the world 3 times over. It was felt going around the planet 3 times. And we now have scientific knowledge that can produce even more destructive weapons. They're smaller, but they're more destructive. For instance, today a military commander of a nuclear submarine wields the power to obliterate 150 large cities with just one sub. So when Christ said what he said here in Matthew 24, unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved alive, he meant it. And we live at the end of an age where this is now possible, and it was never possible prior to this time in human history. Let's go on here in verse 23, Matthew 24, verse 23. If anyone says to you, look, here is Christ, or there, don't believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. Christ said if it were possible, it would be done, but it's not possible to deceive the very elect. Now, that doesn't mean we can't fall away, that we couldn't fall out of prayerful contact with Christ, with God the Father, and his Son, Jesus Christ, and fall away from worshiping these two powerful beings. We certainly could do that. But if we do that knowingly, we'll just end up in the lake of fire. We weren't totally deceived. We did it knowingly, and there's consequences for that. It's a lot of people are led astray. They're led to believe lies. Satan is a liar. He's the father of it. And we look at, even in our own country, how the news media has lied, and in other countries, how the propaganda machine has been alive and well down through the centuries. We certainly live at a time with technology where lies are abundant. People are carried about with every wind of doctrine. They get on the internet and they read something, or they go watch a video and they're convinced. Whether it's accurate or inaccurate, or whether it's true or false, many are carried about with every wind of doctrine. They buy into this stuff. They believe it. Some perpetuate lies that haters come up with. They, frankly, are bearing false witness. They seek to destroy the reputation of others. And again, Satan's the accuser of the brethren. These are willing tools in Satan's hand, and they spread lies and hate without facts. They don't have the truth. Somebody writes it, people read it, they believe it. And God has told us, don't lie, don't bear false witness. It can destroy people, it can destroy reputations. I know we have plenty of lies spread about us. Recently, some more big lies spread, but some people read it and believe it. The beauty is that God sees it all. God knows what's true and not true. He knows what's right and what's wrong. And we have to be very careful in the Church of God not to promote and perpetuate lies. We don't have the facts, we shouldn't say it. There are people who have said Mr. Armstrong was a pedophile. That's a lie. It's a damnable lie. It's a horrible lie. And if somebody accused you of that and you weren't that, would people then doubt, well, maybe, is there a chance? You ruin reputations, you ruin lives, and that's why God is so direct about bearing false witness. And if you perpetuate that, were you there? Do you have any facts? Do you have any proof? No, but if you perpetuate that, you'll answer for that. If you disrespect somebody, a servant of God like that, well, you know what? You'll answer for your accusation and your false witness against him. That's the world we live in, and we have to be careful not to be sucked into, AI is going to be a big test. We know it, artificial intelligence. It'll be used for some good purposes, but there will be a dark side to it, just like computers have a good side and a dark side. Our phones and technology have a really good side, but they have a real dark side. Satan will capitalize on the dark side, and we have to be careful. Goes on in verse 27, for as lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. In other words, the return of Jesus Christ will be visible to everyone. The Greek word that's used here is astrape, A-S-T-R-A-P-E. A-S-T-R-A-P-E. And it means the lightning of thunderstorms or any brilliant illumination. Now, what brilliant light comes out of the east and shines onto the west? The sun does. You can see the sun, and Christ's presence will be like the sun shining in its strength. We see a description in Revelation 1, verse 16, and a glorified Christ looks like the sun shining in its strength. So every eye will see it. It says, for wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered. So in answering the question, Christ talks about this. It's kind of an indirect answer, but when the disciples asked where Jesus' return would take place, he didn't, again, directly answer it. Rather, he said, where the body is, the eagles will be gathered. The term eagles here refers to vultures, is the correct translation. Where do vultures gather? Over dead animals and dead people. right? When the judgment comes, it's going to be final. It's going to be terrible. The stench of death and the presence of vultures will be everywhere. No one will need to look for the place of judgment, right? The presence of the vultures will reveal where the carcasses are, is basically what Christ was telling them. It says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven will be shaken. He's talking about the heavenly signs in the sun, moon, and stars. And if you look at end-time events in Revelation, you have 7 seals, you have 7 trumpet plagues, and you have the 7 last plagues, or the bowl plagues. The first 4 seals are the first 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? The 5th seal is the martyrdom of the saints, and the 6th seal is the heavenly signs. And one of the things that we've taught for a long time is the Great Tribulation is Satan's wrath against mankind. God gets involved with heavenly signs. He makes his presence known, and then Christ and the day of the Lord and all those important events that take place with the 7 trumpets and the 7 last plagues follow on the heels of the Great Tribulation, which will last 2.5 years, and the day of the Lord for a year. Joel talks about, in Joel 2:31, the sun will be turned into darkness, the moon into blood, before the coming and great and awesome day of the Lord. So we see events that begin to happen here in significance. He says in verse 30, then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So verses 29 and 30 here show that problems of unequaled severity will trouble the world, but Christ will not return until after this tribulation, after the great heavenly signs occur. And he will send his angels with the great shout of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Now the Bible says a tremendous noise will rend the air at Christ's coming. Christ's return from heaven will also be accompanied by a great shout. 1 Thessalonians 4:16. Let's go there. Keep your mark here, Matthew 24. 1 Thessalonians. So not only do we have a sound of a great trumpet, but also his return will be accompanied by a great shout. It says here in verse 16 of 1 Thessalonians 4, for the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. So this is the time when the saints are caught up to be with Christ in the clouds of the atmosphere. And Thessalonians chapter 4, 1 Thessalonians 4 tells us the dead rise first. Those of us which are alive and remain then are caught up together with them in the clouds. And we see that in 1 Thessalonians 4, the next verse here, verse 17. Before I go back to Matthew 24, let's go to 1 Corinthians 15 as well. 1 Corinthians 15 is nicknamed the resurrection chapter. I don't think we ever preach a funeral or a memorial service without going 1 Corinthians 15 or 1 Thessalonians 4. One of the beautiful things about our funeral service or memorial service is we talk about the hope of the resurrection. I mean, it's a positive message, but it's also a chance to reach people that are not in a church, that most of them sitting in the room, unless it's a longtime church member and they had a lot of church friends, but a lot of times it's people who aren't in a church. There may be relatives or friends, and it's a chance for us to preach the truth and to lay it out there about the resurrection, that you don't die and go to heaven. It's a positive message. We have the hope of the resurrection, and people are often shocked by what we teach and what we say, and they're like, man, I didn't know that was in the Bible. But it's right here. But in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 51 and 52, it says, behold, I tell you a mystery, we shall not all sleep. Now, the Bible calls death a sleep, and it does it repeatedly, because that's how God looks at it, right? You're going to die, but you're going to be resurrected. He said all that are in the graves, in John's Gospel, all that are in the graves will be resurrected. Now, not all in the same resurrection. There's an order of resurrections. But we, he said, shall not all sleep. In other words, there will be people in this generation alive at the return of Jesus Christ. They're not dead yet. When he returns, we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. So your physical body will end, and the next moment you'll put on immortality, and you will join Christ and all the saints, the dead in Christ that are there before us, in the clouds. And when does that happen? In the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. Again, there are 7 trumpets, right? The 7th trumpet is announcing the return of Christ. It's also a great shout. And then he pours out the 7 last plagues. And when you read about the 7 last plagues, they have to be in rapid fire succession, because all the green grass is burned up, all the fresh water is destroyed. You can't live more than a few days. So that has to be fairly quick. It has to be incredible. It's like a finale of a fireworks show. It's going to be pretty intense. And then when it's done, for eternity, people will know, you know what, don't mess with God. He is powerful. He is almighty. He meant what he said. And I think people that come up in the resurrection are going to go, wow, you know what, we better listen to this powerful God. I think they'll be more apt to pay attention after they go through what's going to happen, especially those here at the end of an age and others that hear about it. And by the way, the trumpet mentioned here in 1 Thessalonians 4:16, 1 Corinthians 15:52, we just read. Also Revelation 11:15 and 11:18 all refer to the same thing. So the events that are described by John in his gospel could only apply to the time of the resurrection when the last trumpet is blown. The same would appear with Paul's writings in 1 Thessalonians and 1 Corinthians 15. Let's go back to Matthew 24:32. We'll continue Matthew 24, drop down to verse 32. It says, now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So again, this verse is saying that when we see the signs, right, when we see that the buds are beginning to come out on the trees, we know the season's changing, right? Spring's here. Summer's near. And so when we look at these end time events, he said, look, you're going to see the signs. There'll be proof, based on these prophecies, you're going to know it's getting close. It's getting imminent. Now, the problem has been that many have become, I guess their senses have become dulled. They've become tired of waiting. They've said, look, we said we were fleeing in 1975 in prophecy. We've said that it was imminent before the death of Mr. Armstrong. We've been saying it for 39 years. Like, how much time? Could be a lot of time left. And people begin to get lulled into a sense of security once again. Hey, we've got time. We can make it to safety, right? We can turn this around. And they're going to get caught unawares because that's just what God said would happen. When you see these signs, you know it's near. It's even at the doors. In Christ, what did he mean here? When verse 34, it says, surely I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till these things take place. So did he wasn't referring to his own generation. All those people died. He's referring in the context to the end of an age, and when it was possible for all humans to die, no flesh to be saved alive, this prophecy jumped into action. And he said, this generation will not pass. There are people, and I'll use myself an example. When I was 18 and went to Ambassador College and Mr. Armstrong would give a Bible study or a sermon, I remember him reading these verses saying there are people in this room that will see the return of Jesus Christ. This generation is not going to pass. Some of you sitting here will be there and see it. Now, a lot of people have gotten old and died. By the way, Mr. Dick Thompson, who was a teacher at Big Sandy and a minister worldwide, died also this past weekend. I think he was 75. He was in Cagua. But, a college teacher and everything. It's one after another. Everybody's getting old. They're gone, and the people who were the young guys are now the old guys, and, time is shifting. But in 1945, these bombs went off, and by 11 years later, we could wipe all humanity off the face of the earth. And that was a long time ago. And so here we are at an end of an age, knowing that things are close, knowing that the transition has occurred to the final era of the Church of God, knowing that 40 is a big number. 40 from the death of Mr. Armstrong's next January. I mean, a time of wandering. People have been spiritually wandering about. I'm not setting a date of when Christ will return. I don't know when he'll return, and he made it clear that it's not good for us to know, and we won't know. We just need to be ready. But we have to also say we have to have a sense of urgency. Don't think you've got 50 years or 40 years. You don't think that way. It was never good for the church to think that way. They had a sense of urgency in the days of Paul. They certainly had a sense of urgency in the days of Herbert W. Armstrong, Worldwide Church of God. And we've had that sense of urgency. I remember Mr. Meredith saying 5 to 7 years, 5 to 7 years. And he did it for a long time, and now he's dead and he's sleeping. But it is way closer to being realized than it was then. We're a huge amount of time closer to the return of Christ and these events erupting. And once again, what did God say? Thief in the night. He said, you're going to say peace and safety. You're going to think, man, you know what? Economy's good. The Middle East is calmed down. Beware. That's when you have to beware. That's when you have to, really get your focus right. Jesus was, again, not speaking of his own age when he said that this generation shall not pass. In this prophecy of Matthew 24, Christ gives a point-by-point description of what's going to occur in the last days before the second coming of Christ. And he prophesied wars, famines, disease epidemics, earthquakes. He foretold a final persecution of his true followers, a martyrdom of the saints. He talks about false ministers rising to deceive the world. He talks about a world that is lawless and far from God. He sees a breakdown in morality. In this country, it is just accepted that you can have a perverse lifestyle, and that's just fine. It's not even considered sinful or wrong. And yet God lays it out. Fornicator won't be in the kingdom. The adulterer won't be in the kingdom. The homosexual won't be in the kingdom. These are sins of grievous nature to God, and yet the world has embraced and accepted these things. Hopefully we haven't. We always say, hate the sin. Love the sinner, but hate the sin. You don't, you're homosexual, I'm going to beat you up. No. We treat them like a human being. But the sin, the act is sinful. And we need to say what it is, and we need to be bold about that and not hold back when asked. And frankly, the ministry has an important duty to stand tall on the issues. I mean, even the world's ministers should be standing up on this. They should be saying these lifestyles are unacceptable. The Bible, you can't cut these pages out of the Bible and these verses out of the Bible. God says don't do it. It's sinful. He gets to define what sin is, what's right and what's wrong, and we should roll with that. But the world is far from God. Now, our current president has pushed back on transgenders, men and women's sports. He's done some really good things that should be done, but, that should have never happened in the first place. But, okay, I like the good things. But we're not addressing these other issues. We're still having abortions at an alarming rate. We're murdering babies. That's what it is. And you say that on radio or TV, and they kick you off radio and TV because you can't say that. This is the world. God's not happy with what's going on. Is the world turning to God? Are we giving God the credit for anything anymore? Not much. But Christ here goes point by point throughout this prophecy, and he's speaking of the close of the age of Satan's rule over the earth, and he was speaking of a crisis that's going to face our generation, and that's what the context of what has been written here. And the other thing we can't do is shrink away from prophecy. There are many who don't want to hear about prophecy. I've got many emails from people who that's so negative, it's so depressing. This sounds brutal. Yeah, it's going to be brutal. And we're going to have to go through some hard things to get to the kingdom, the good thing. But God loves all these people. He created all these people. They're just not listening. They're rebelling against him, and he has to get their attention. He has to correct them. And he has to stop man from killing himself, because that's what it's going to come to, and it's going to be sudden. If you're reading anything about Germany, the amount of military weapons and machinery that they are building at an alarming rate is astounding. It's unbelievable how fast and how furious they're working at their war machine. Of course, everybody talks about for national defense. Well, a military is also offensive. It's not always defensive. It just sounds better, so that's the terminology. We are living in the prophesied generation immediately preceding the coming of Jesus Christ and these great events. He spoke of this generation, the end of the age generation. In Luke 12, keep your place here in Matthew 24, but Luke 12, verse 41 and 42 and 43. Luke 12, 41. Notice what Christ told Peter here. Then Peter said to him, Lord, do you speak this parable only to us or to all people? And Jesus, or the Lord, said, who then is that faithful and wise steward who, notice, his master will make ruler over his household to give him their portion of food in due season? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. So what is the context, the time setting? It's the end of the age. It's the return of Jesus Christ. So Christ's prophecy was directed toward the true disciples, his people, in the end time generation. That's our generation, who would be developing godly character, putting his way of life into practice in their daily lives, and preparing to rule with Christ, supporting his work. You know, it's an incredible, Matthew 24 is an incredible prophecy. And if it doesn't stir us to action, if it doesn't get our attention, we're going to end up 600 yards short from safety, just like the hot shots. Only this is a much bigger deal. This is spiritually speaking. It says in verse 35, back to Matthew 24. It says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. Now, some people take this verse and they take other verses in the Bible and they go, look, God's going to vaporize the earth. It's going to cease to exist. That's not true. You have to put the verses together. What is the context? So in Ecclesiastes 1, verse 4, and again, we'll just keep our mark in Matthew 24. We'll go back and forth, but let's go to Ecclesiastes 1, verse 4. And wise King Solomon was inspired to write this. Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 4. It says, one generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. So the Bible doesn't contradict itself. So what's happening here? Well, the earth will continue to exist. And when we go back to what Peter wrote in the New Testament, we see that the surface of the earth and everything on it that is combustible is going to be burned up, including those who are cast into that lake of fire. These are the wicked who choose that path. God said, you got a choice. You can choose that path. I hope you don't, but if you do, that's the consequence. And then God's going to remake the surface of the earth, and he's going to make it a habitation for himself, that is God the Father, and the entire God family. It will become the center of the universe, and we'll have a new heavens and a new earth because it's renewed, and we read about that in Revelation 21:22, when we read about the new heaven and the new earth. So the point that Christ is making here, though, in verse 35, is that the words of Jesus Christ are more certain than the very existence of the universe. I mean, his word is absolute, and you can count on it. Go to Psalm 102, and we could turn to a lot of verses, but just one more here, Psalm 102. This also is a good add-in here. Psalm 102, and we'll start in verse 25 and read through verse 27. He says, of old you laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you will endure. Yes, they will grow old like a garment, like a cloak. You will change them, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will have no end. In 1 Peter 1, 24 and 25, and then we'll go back to Matthew. 1 Peter 1. We have to let the Bible interpret itself. And by the way, on the website, we have about 70 questions and answers. I'll keep adding to that. We'll get it up to 100 by the feast and just keep going. But these are questions that people write in. They're the same questions that we've been asked for a long time, and I use all the literature. It's nothing new. But there's a lot of questions that people could mark their Bible and say, hey, this is a difficult scripture. How do we explain this? What about this? And how do we explain it? And we'll be making copies for all the ministers, a hard copy, so they can use it in their libraries or whatever. But I think you'll find it fun. It's a nice little study to go through those questions. They're all about a page or less. There's a couple that are a couple pages, but try to keep it brief and answer directly. But it's a good study to mark your Bible, and I think you will enjoy them. They're available, like I say, on the website. This I think I may have even addressed this one. And again, the church has addressed it. I'm not coming up with new stuff. But in 1 Peter 1, verse 24 and 25, again, this is quoting the writings of Isaiah. It says, all flesh is as grass, and the glory of man is the flower of the grass. The grass withers, and its flower falls away, but the word of the Lord endures forever. So once again, heaven and earth will pass away. My words will by no means pass away, Christ said. So back to Matthew 24. Let's drop down to verse 36. Matthew 24 and verse 36. It says, but of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. Now, some thought the apostles, they certainly would know the day or the hour, or people living in the last days would know the day and the hour, but that's not true. That's not what the Bible says. Peter asked Jesus if he meant only the apostles would be unable to know the hour or the day. Is that what he meant? And Christ's response was clear that, you're not going to know, and the people living at the end of the age are not going to know. If you read Luke 12, 40 through 43, it makes that abundantly clear. Not even those of us living now will know the exact day or hour. That the signs will be there. Christ said, you'll see the signs. You see the trees budding, the season's changing, right? Be watching, paying attention to what's happening in the world. Watch, therefore, and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass in Luke 21, about verse 36, I think. Let's go back to Matthew 24, verse 37. It says, but as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. And when we look back to the days of Noah in the New Testament is called a preacher of righteousness. So he preached, but he had a lot of work to do. He had a lot of boat building, right? This big ark. And they worked on it, for a long time, decade after decade. And people would come to check out the ark like, what? This guy lost his mind. These people are building this massive boat out in the middle of nowhere. There's no ocean right next to it or anything like that. What is this guy doing? And then they would all come around. He'd have a chance to say, hey, man, and preach to him. He's a preacher of righteousness. But when you think of it, 8 people got on the boat. That's it. I think here we are at the end of an age, and people are like, man, we're going to grow, we're going to get massive. Well, I don't think so. I think we're at the end of an age. 8 people got on the boat. That's all. Of all the people that came from all around. And then God didn't let it rain immediately, right? They were in the boat waiting for a few days, right? About a week. And then God goes, okay, now it's time for the rain. And I'm sure the mockers and the people out there were catcalling and making fun of them. And they had to have faith. God said it'd rain. He said, get in the boat. He got all these animals in there. We're going to look really stupid if this doesn't happen. But God said to do it, and they did it. And I often wonder at the end of the age, it's time to flee, and will God do a similar thing to test us a little bit? Say, yep, who's leaving, who's staying? And Noah hung in there. He believed God, and he knew what God said would happen. But as the days of Noah were, nobody suspected this. They didn't believe it. We're at the end of an age, and there are many people in different Church of God groups that no longer believe we're fleeing to a place of safety. They don't teach it. Well, you're not going to flee if you don't even believe in it. But there are many out there that have come to that conclusion. God can take care of us wherever we are. He certainly could, but that's not what he's going to do. He said what he's going to do. And we see that there are a series of miracles in Revelation 12 when the church is fleeing into her place of safety. The earth opens up, swallows up the flood or the army that pursues the church. Why is there an army after the church? Well, they're like David Koresh. They're going to go drink the Kool-Aid. We got to save them from themselves, right? We've got to stop this. Relatives, friends, calling the authorities. Hey, they've lost their minds. We think we've been challenged. We'll be challenged a lot harder than we have been. And the only way we're going to know is we're close to God, and God makes it clear, and we discern it, and however he chooses to let us know, it'll be time, and we'll have to have faith, and we'll have to go. And when people are saying peace and safety, when people are saying, hey, the politicians, the world, look, it's never been better, people will be caught off guard. And the next thing he likens it to is in verse 38, for as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. And he goes on then to say, then at the time of Christ's return, 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and the other left. Now some people go, look, there it is. People are going to be raptured away. That's not what it's about. There are no scriptures that say we're going to be raptured away to heaven. We'll be caught up in the clouds with Christ at a certain point. But to properly understand these verses, we look at the context, starting in verse 21. He talks about the Great Tribulation, the end-time events that would lead up to his return. In verses 37 and 38, he referred to the time of Noah, just before the flood. People are going about their daily lives, right? Business and their daily lives, and disaster came upon them suddenly. And Christ said, same thing is going to happen at the end of the age in that respect. People will be living their usual lives. They'll be working in the fields, grinding at the mill, and so forth, when the Great Tribulation falls on them unexpectedly. And this passage, we've always said, could also apply to another future event. At the beginning of Matthew 24, Christ told his disciples about his return to the earth, and in this light, verses 40 and 41 could be taken to mean that Christ's return is to be, at his return there will be a separation between those who attain to the first resurrection and those who do not. One is taken and one is not. Now, some of the young children who are not yet baptized, do not yet have God's Spirit, will live into the millennium as physical human beings. Others are not going to make it. They're going to end up in the third resurrection and be cast into the lake of fire because they had their opportunity and they blew it. You only get one opportunity. And God is merciful, but God has to draw a line in the sand. And there are verses that say if the righteous are scarcely saved, what about the sinner and the unbeliever? 1 Peter 4, 17, 18. We have to be close to God. We have to take this for real. We have to be serious about our calling. When the saints rise to meet Christ in the air, they will have been changed into spirit beings, and then they will descend with Christ to the Mount of Olives, Zechariah 14:4, and they will begin to rule the world with Christ in the millennium. Verse 42, it says, watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming, but know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. In my whole life, I've only caught one time people robbing me. And my brother and I were carrying our stuff up the steps into an apartment. He was helping me move, Joette and I move our stuff. And I looked at the truck, and I saw 2 guys stealing boxes off the truck. And it was across the courtyard, and I was younger, and I took after one. He dropped the boxes and went that way. The other guy kept the stuff, so I let him go and caught the other guy and tackled him and got my stuff back. Only once, right? Because I saw it, I prevented it. I got the material back, threatened him, let him go, and moved on with my life. But most of the time, right, you can't prepare because you don't know it. And watch, because you don't know the hour the Lord is coming, but know this, if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed the house to get broken into. Again, this doesn't mean the thief comes silently and invisibly. The Bible gives a very clear description. The thief or burglars don't come invisibly. They come unexpectedly. They catch people unaware. They caught by surprise. They get caught unprepared. And so Christ will come very visibly, but he's going to catch the world unexpectedly, and they're not going to know the hour or the day. It says in verse 44, therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. What does God say? The church has to be made ready before the return of Christ. And maybe we've had a little extra time to get ready, and maybe God's had to hold it up because we're not ready. The question is, when are we going to be ready? And what do we have to do? We have to start living righteously. We have to start applying the commandments. We have to root out the sin. We have to make adjustments in our life so that God can use us in the next. And he can put us to work. And if we really take it seriously, we realize this is a training ground. This is where God is testing us, improving us, and developing character in us so that he can use us in the next life. And if we're not doing that, he can't use us. Or he certainly couldn't use us as effectively. He might say, look, man, I was going to give you 10, but the best I can do is 5 because I don't see the growth. I don't, you've made this much progress. I mean, why not be all in and totally committed to whatever God says to do? And be teachable and say, look, I got some areas I can improve and work on it. And we do. And work with our children. The most important job we have as a parent is to make sure our kids get into the kingdom of God, get them on that path. Now, we can't do it for them, but we certainly direct them. We can correct them. We can guide them. We can teach them. We can make sure they understand how important it is. So we have generations like like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right, are a good example of generations of people that stayed on this path. And if we're not doing that, it doesn't matter if they become a doctor or a billionaire or any of that. That's not more important than seeing them on the path to the kingdom. And that requires us to be parents, which is not always fun and not always popular. It requires the ministry to address problems. Say, look, this isn't right. We got to fix this. And do it in a way that hopefully people will respond, and sometimes they don't. You do what you can. We want them in the kingdom. But if somebody's here and like an apple that's rotten in a crate of good apples, they're going to spread that rot throughout the crate. And you go, look, you can't be here. Unless you stop doing this, and then you're welcome to come right back. But this behavior is unacceptable. We're not going to let that happen. And your children, you have rules in your house, uphold those rules. Be strong on those rules. And in the end, it'll be for the benefit of them. And yet we live in a world where people don't do that. Families often, even in the church, aren't doing their job. We've got to make sure and do it. And make sure our children, that they're part of this. This is not just dad and mom's deal. This is their deal. They want to live this way of life. They want to pursue this path. And nothing would make us happier than if our children make it. You know, Moses at one point said, God blot me out of the book of life. Like, let them in and I'll sacrifice. And God says, well, no, I'm not going to do that. But I like your heart, Moses. I like the way you're thinking here. You care about the people. And you're doing what you can. And yet, how many times did they want to stone Moses? How many times did they disrespect him and say, who put you in charge? We're going back to Egypt. I mean, the things that he went through. And, of course, Joshua and Caleb, who stood tall about the promised land in their report, people wanted to stone them to death. These guys had a little rough. And, it could have been 3 million people or more that fled Egypt. and 2 come back with a good report out of that whole group. And instead of half the crowd saying, hey, we're with Joshua and Caleb, they all wanted to get rid of them. This is the world we live in. We're not going to be, this isn't a popularity contest, and we're not going to be well liked, especially by the world. Because Christ said that. He said, look, if you act like the world, you're part of the world, they'll love you because you're like their own. But if you're different, if this church makes you different, God's church makes you different, and you're standing by the values and the principles of the Bible, they're going to hate you. And Christ said it. They hated Christ. Christ was absolutely perfect in every respect. He never sinned, and they killed him. And he said, if they hated me, they will hate you, and they hated me first. So get ready for this. People, it's the way it's going to be. And I'm not sure everybody's up to that, which is a shame. As a thief in the night, it's going to come quickly. You know, this hotshot crew of firefighters, you know, and most of them were young guys. Their leader was, I think, 43. He's a tough guy, been in a lot of battles, fires. But on this particular day, they underestimated the wind change and the speed of the fire, and they didn't drop everything and sprint to safety. They kept their packs on. They marched down the hill. They were making their way down there, thought they had time, and when the fire came over the ridge and into the valley, it came so fast there was no escape. You know, you look in the Bible, you know, we have 5 wise and 5 foolish. The door gets shut. People who had oil on their lamps, right, had God's Spirit, and they were living God's way of life, they're in. The rest come back with oil too late, the door shut. You missed it. What a shame. And how many warnings do we need? We have all these verses, all these examples. The other event that God likens this to is the days of Sodom and Gomorrah. And what happened there, the exact same thing. Lot was able to warn his sons-in-law. He was, you know, warn everybody, and the angels told him, hey, you have relatives, you have friends, like, get them, we got to go. Finally, the angels are dragging him out of the city, and who goes? His wife, and 2 daughters, and that's it. And then the wife looked back and said, no, it's just Lot and the 2 daughters that escaped. But it was imminent, and he didn't know how close and imminent it was until the angels drug him out of the city, and it burned to the ground. Suddenly, as a thief in the night, unexpectedly. Again, Christ is pictured again in Revelation 16:15 as coming as a thief. He said, blessed, in Revelation 16:15, blessed is he who watches and keeps his garments. Right? He's talking about white linen garments, about garments that picture righteousness and the keeping of the commandments. Lest he walk naked and they see his shame. So we are living near the end of this present age. We are living at the time that the Bible describes as the last days, or the end of the age. Are we now preparing to rule with Christ? Do we have a sense of urgency? Are we close to God? Because we'll need to be to endure the things that are coming and to make good decisions and to be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man.
For more information, go to our website at cogassembly.org. Copyright 2025, Church of God Assembly. All rights reserved.